GMOs and why they are important, and particularly why there needs to be some change of attitude within Europe about these issues. So can we, yeah.
So I
got involved in this
because I went
to this symposium that was celebrating my friend Mark Van Montague's 80th birthday.
And the symposium,
for the first time, I think since I can remember, I actually sat and listened to nothing but plant science for a whole day. And the thing that struck me about this was that all of the plant scientists were complaining that it was very difficult for them to do their work. Here they were trying to improve crops, trying to make better plants, trying to help agriculture, and yet they were constantly being harassed, either directly by personal attacks or by demonstrations from people whenever they got up to talk. And this was all as a result of a campaign that had been started by Greenpeace and by a series of parties that were anti-agriculture improvements that were being brought about by GMOs. And this all happened for really some ridiculous reasons, which I will go into a little bit later.
So
the day after the symposium, I'd been scheduled to go and talk to the European Commission, who'd asked me to talk about the future of medicine. And I decided that I was going to actually talk about GMOs instead. And I'd been warned ahead of time that this was a silly thing to do in Europe because nobody liked to hear about GMOs, and they certainly didn't want them talked about in political circles. But that usually makes me want to do it all the more when people tell me I shouldn't do it. So I took the tack that when you're thinking about medicine for developed countries and for developing countries, the needs are very different.
So here in
Europe, in the USA, in Japan, we have a lot of money and can afford to pay for very expensive medicines. But if you live in the developing world, then you need practical solutions and you need things that are cheap because there's just not that amount of money available.
And in particular,
if you're hungry at night, then food is medicine. And so this was the tack that I took and that I've taken in many talks ever since, is that for those people, 800 million of them who go to bed hungry every night, they don't want drugs, they're not looking for antibiotics, they're not looking for fancy, they're looking for food. And that seems to me a very reasonable thing to do. And so the question is, how can we make sure that they have that food? Well, if you listen to Greenpeace, Greenpeace will say, well, it's only a matter of distribution, that there's plenty of food in the world, it's true, and all we need to do is redistribute it. But if you look at what goes on, say, just in the US, there are people in the US, many of them, who go to bed hungry every night. Because even in the US, where we have an abundance of food, excellent distribution networks, the food does not get to the people that it needs. And you could just imagine how difficult it would be to take that food and deliver it in Africa to the poor people who are living there. It's just not practical. And that's not what people want. They want to grow their own, and they want to do the best they can. And I thought that after Mark's symposium, that maybe there was something that I could do. I'd organized several other campaigns of Nobel laureates to get them involved in a cause, and I thought maybe this is a cause that we can do something about. And so I took some time to plan it and to talk to some of my Nobel colleagues and see if they thought this was a reasonable idea and something that they wanted to get involved in. And the formal organization of the campaign began in July 2015. And that basically meant my contacting all of the living Nobel laureates to ask them if they would join the campaign. And by June of 30th of 2016, we had 121 Nobel laureates who all said, yes, we will join you in this campaign. So I organized a press conference in Washington. We got a massive amount of press coverage. We got a lot of coverage on the internet. And basically what we did on that day was to call on the Green parties, Greenpeace and the others, to just stop scaring the public by pretending that GMO foods must be banned because they're dangerous. And this, unfortunately, has been their scare tactic for many, many years now. And I'm sure there are some of you in this room who also feel a little nervous about GMOs because you've had so much advertising against them. We sent this letter to Greenpeace, never got a reply. We sent the letter to the head of every UN delegation from every country, and we got replies. I got a reply from maybe 5 of those, and then we went on the road. This is a little cartoon that I rather like that illustrates the problem. On the left, you see the anti-GMO people trying to scare everybody about how dangerous this stuff is. And on the right, you've got a little boy who, in answer to the question, do you know what this stuff can do for you? He says, yes, it can keep me alive. And I think this is, for me, one of the key things that we see. That it's all very well to sit in Europe and say GMOs are bad and that we shouldn't have them. That would be okay if they kept it in Europe. Europe doesn't need GMOs. You can do pretty well without them. You don't see a lot of thin Europeans walking around. But if you go to Africa and you go to South America and you go to Asia, you go to some of the poorer countries in the world, it's the little boy on the right that is typical of what is happening because he doesn't have enough food to eat. And to think that we should sit here in the developed world and tell the developing world not to get involved in this technology which can feed them, frankly, I find it immoral, and I know my colleagues here also find it immoral. Now, food means agriculture, and agriculture got started about 12,000 years ago. And what's happened over the time is that the hunter-gatherers, rather than going out into the forest to pick up food every day, decided they could plant some of this food right next to their home, and they could begin to grow the food that they needed to eat themselves. And of course, they had plenty of neighbors, and the neighbors sometimes found a better variety of something, and they would grow that, and then everybody started growing it. And then, much later, people discovered that they could cross plants. You could take a plant that had a desirable characteristic and cross it with something that didn't, and transfer that characteristic into the plant you wanted it in. And this is called traditional plant breeding, and it works okay if the trait you want is in a relative that will mate with the plant you're growing, but if it's in another plant altogether, you can't do it. And it's also a very slow process, a very time-consuming process. If you look at the evolution of maize, of corn, you'll see on the left is the old teosinte, which was the original wild variety of corn that grew in Central America. And you can see it's a skinny little thing, and it doesn't have nice cobs on it in the way that the one on the right does. What happened over the years was that people within Central America, South America, and then in the US started to get better and better breeds of this maize until we see the one that we have today. But it takes a long time to do this. And the reason is illustrated here. Conventional breeding says, I've got this crop that I grow at the moment, and I have another one that has a desirable trait. Maybe it grows taller, and I want my crop to grow taller. And so you can make a cross thinking that there is a gene or several genes that are responsible for the trait that you want. And you try, in this case, it's the blue ball that you see on the side, and you want to transfer that blue ball, that gene, into the crop that you're growing. And you can do this, and what happens is at the first round you get a mix of all the genes. All the genes get mixed up. And then you can slowly cross back the one you want to the original elite strain and try to get rid of all of the genes that were transferred that you really don't want, and just get the one that's there. But you don't ever just get the one that's there. You always get some extra ones, and you kind of hope that they're going to be okay and not cause a problem. And this takes a long time. Crops, they don't grow as fast as you might like. Now, if you can't get the trait you want that way, then the typical thing that you do is to make mutants of the plant. So you irradiate it, or you treat it with chemicals that are mutagenic, in the hope that you can get the desired trait that you want, maybe by knocking out a gene that is useful.
Now,
along came Mark and several other people who were involved in this whole process and showed that there was a much better way of doing it. What Mark discovered was that there was a bacterium that was able to transfer DNA from itself into the plant. And so Mark thought, what if we take not the gene that's normally in this bacterium, but we take a gene that we want to put in the plant? Could you do that? And the answer was yes, and that is illustrated here. You take the gene you want, you put it on this small circular DNA called a plasmid, and you can transfer that into the plant that you want. And in this way, you don't get a lot of extraneous genes going in. You just get the one you want. And over the years, we found out how to do this in quite a sophisticated way, and we can do it very quickly now. And it's way, way faster than any traditional process, and has the beauty that it's precise. Here you've got something that is very specific.
So when we compare
the two, on the left, you see the conventional scheme takes a long time, get a lot of genes that you don't want. Maybe you have to mutagenize. But with precision breeding, with the GMO method, you just take the gene you want and move it into the plant you want.
And then Greenpeace
comes along and says, this old way of doing things in which you don't really know what's going in, this is perfectly safe because we've been doing it for 10,000 years. But the way on the right, where you take one gene and you know what it is, this must be dangerous, and this was the basis of their campaign. And I'll tell you a little more about how that came about in a moment. But before I go there, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. For anyone who's not a geneticist and doesn't understand all the genetics,
think of it in
the following way.
I have two cars.
One of the cars has a GPS system in it,
but
my car, I want to put the GPS system into it.
What do I do?
Do I take the two cars apart, mix everything up, and then pick the one that has the GPS system? Or do I simply unplug the GPS system and move it into my car?
Well,
I think you all know the answer to that. It's obvious. You take the thing you want and put it where you want it to go. And that is the GMO method. That's a way of making GMOs. That is what Mark discovered how to do. Now, what if I take the GPS system, not from a car, but from an airplane, and put it into my car? Is my car now going to fly? Well, I think we know the answer to that too. Cars, it's quite difficult to get them to fly. But Greenpeace would tell you if I take a gene from a salmon and put it into a plant, maybe that plant's going to swim. This is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense, and it's unscientific. And it's a shame because, on the whole, Greenpeace have showed a lot of respect for science in many of the things they do. But this is one area where they didn't. And the important thing to note here is that GMO refers to a method. It's a way of doing something. It is not a final product in itself. And what's important is the product is not the method. The method doesn't matter. How you do it doesn't matter. And this is true for traditional methods, for GMO methods, for the methods that we will invent in 10, 20, 30 years to come. You want to know, is the product safe? Yes, let's test it. Find out if it's safe.
Let me give you another
example of this. Here's a production line. Here's a way of making something that will transport you, will take you from point A to point B.
Can you tell me
what is being made in this factory just by looking at the factory, by looking at the method of making it?
Well, obviously
you can't. You've no idea what's coming out at the far end.
Could be a car,
or it could be a tank. Two very different things.
And what's important
is what comes out at the end,
not the method
by which it was made. Now, let's get back to plants. Plants have a big problem. When a beetle comes along and wants to eat it, they have a problem. They can't run away. If a lion comes and tries to attack us, we can run away and we can get away from it all. But they can't. And so how do they protect themselves? Well, they put pesticides inside them. They make pesticides to kill the bugs that want to eat them. This is the natural way of doing things. And plants all have pesticides in them.
I'll show you one
example here. This is celery.
There's a
table on the left which shows a variety of common vegetables that we all eat. And what Bruce Ames and co. did was to look and see what are the chemicals that they make, what are the chemicals they are making to protect themselves. And they found that quite a lot of them had something called methoxysorolin in them. Now, sorolin, it turns out, is quite carcinogenic. If I were to just feed you sorolin, you would get cancer pretty quickly. And in fact, the ladies who used to cut up celery to get it ready to go into the supermarket got a lot of their juice on the hands. And because they were constantly exposing their hands to celery juice, which contains sorolin, they got a contact dermatitis. They had a problem. In some cases, they could get cancer as a result of this. Now this is a typical example of a safe compound, a safe crop that has come as a result of traditional breeding. But in fact, it doesn't matter if you only eat celery and you don't eat it as the sole source of your dietary intake. You won't have a problem because your body knows how to take care of the sorolin, of the small amounts that are in there. So here's a case where it's actually the quantity of this dangerous compound that's important, not the fact that it's there. But if celery was a GMO, under the current regulations, it would be banned. You would not be allowed to eat it. That also goes for parsley, mushrooms, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels. You would not be allowed to eat this if these were GMOs. This makes no sense. We eat it all the time and we know that it's perfectly safe. So sometimes when you're making regulations, you really have to think somewhat scientifically about what is going on. If the quantities of some of these dangerous compounds are so small that they don't cause a problem, then you can guarantee they will be safe and you won't have a problem with them. Now, I want to get back to why the GMO campaign, the anti-GMO campaign in Europe got going. In many developing countries, they need better food. And the reason we have good food is because the big agricultural companies have focused on the foods that we eat. They made sure that maize was the very best that it possibly could be. Good nutritional value, and it would grow well, you've got good yields. There are relatively few crops that we eat in the West, that we all eat, and the agricultural companies focused on those because this was where they could make money. Were they interested in manioc in Africa? No, because Africa didn't have any money, and there was no incentive for the big agribusinesses to focus on these minor crops. And so what's happened is if you look at the crops that people eat in the West and those that they eat in the developing countries, those in the West have had a lot of breeding. They come out, they're really good. They're about as good as they can be in many cases. Although maybe with GM methods we could improve them a little. But in Africa, there's been no effort to improve the crops. And if you look around in a country, you typically find that all the small farmers have their own seeds which they use and which they keep and they guard jealously, and they don't usually want to share them if they can, because these are the things that they've naturally found are good for them or will grow well in the soil they have. But it's possible to breed these crops and achieve the same kind of yields and the same kind of nutritional value that we have with the crops in the West. And the nice thing about it is by using the GMO method in order to do this is something they can do themselves. They don't need big agribusiness to come along and do it. So why doesn't Europe support GMO crops? Why don't they make sure that these crops and these methods are available in Africa?
So the question
at the bottom is,
could it be politics?
Could it be money? Could it be both?
Well,
the answer is it's both.
What
happened is that the European population were a little concerned that the big agribusinesses in the US were taking over their food supply.
And they
didn't like that so terribly much. And
how do
you stop that? Well, you could just ban Monsanto. You say we're not going to buy anything from Monsanto anymore. Well, that creates a little problem. The farmers were all buying their seeds from Monsanto. And so how can you stop Monsanto? How can you sort of poke them in the face, if you like, and stop them?
Well,
the answer was Monsanto started to bring GMO crops into Europe.
And so
here you had some leverage. Here the Europeans could say, no, GMO crops are very dangerous. We're not going to allow those here in Europe. And so this became a surrogate way of attacking Monsanto.
So the
Green Party started to make up stories about how dangerous GM foods were. You probably have heard the term Frankenfood. There were many terms like that were brought about. There were many scenarios, scary scenarios that they pointed out, that we really don't know whether these things are safe, whether they're not. We've got to test them, and so on and so forth.
And
the best of all was that this decision to stop Monsanto using the GMO approach had no economic consequences for Europe. It didn't matter. You didn't need GM crops. So you don't bring them in, it doesn't matter.
But the
problem is that not content with stopping it in Europe, the Green parties are now going around the world telling the developing countries that they're unsafe. Because they can't say that they're unsafe in Europe, but they're safe elsewhere. You have to have a consistent story. You have to tell the same story. And so the problem now is that we have many developing countries that have decided they simply won't grow GMOs, and they won't allow GMOs into the country, and yet they need them desperately. And this is continuing. The activists from Europe are still continuing to push this anti-GMO, this danger story in the developing world. Now,
I'm telling you that
the method is safe. You can believe me if you like. Some people, just because I'm a Nobel laureate, think I must be saying something good. But if you look at what every scientific society, every professional scientific society in the world, and this is the start of a list of about 250, they have all come out and said there is no reason to worry about GMOs. The method is perfectly safe. If anything, it's safer than the traditional ways of making crops.
Only
two semi-professional societies have come out against it. And that's something called the Institute for Responsible Technology and the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. And these are two pseudo-societies that were put together by anti-GMO activists specifically to try and stop GMOs. They have no scientific credibility at all. In fact, they don't even have a single well-known scientist on these things.
Now,
let me tell you and give you some examples of how GMOs can help the developing world.
And
the first thing I want to talk about is vitamin A deficiency, because this is such a good story, and it's one that Greenpeace have gone after with a vengeance.
If you
look at the world mortality, annual mortality, from vitamin A deficiency, somewhere between close to 2 million children usually die every year because they are deficient in vitamin A. And if you are deficient in vitamin A, you get blindness, childhood blindness. That's a death knell in many developing countries. But you also suffer developmental defects. Your body doesn't develop properly, and that also can be a death knell. And frequently, by age 4 or 5, these children are dead. 2 million every year as a result of this. You compare it with AIDS and tuberculosis and malaria, this is many more children dying from vitamin A deficiency.
And so two scientists, Singo Petraitis and Peter Bayer, decided they wanted to do something about this. And they looked around and they discovered that rice was a crop that was widely cultivated in the developing world, and they thought if they could engineer the genes that would make beta-carotene, the precursor of vitamin A, into rice, then they would be able to provide a good dose of vitamin A to these children and help to prevent childhood blindness and the defects caused by it. So they did this by GMO methods. It became a reality in February 1999. And usually, when something like that happens, you take it out into the field and you try it, and it takes anywhere from 2 to 5 years, usually, before you've got something that is working well in the field. But it's a GMO. And so Greenpeace and all of the anti-GMO people came out heavily against this. And why did they do that? Well, they did that because this is starting to look more like a pharmaceutical than it is a crop. Now, I don't know if there are any diabetics in the room, but if they are, you take human insulin, you inject it. That human insulin is a GMO. We don't harvest it from humans. Instead, we've taken the gene for insulin and put it into bacteria or yeast, and this is the source of the insulin that people inject. That's perfectly safe. And you don't hear Greenpeace saying how bad that is, and yet that's a GMO. And this is the same kind of case. I think Greenpeace thought that if this came to the field very quickly, it would knock out all of their arguments as to why GMOs were dangerous, and they didn't want it. And so what happened, it's still not available, although it was just approved earlier this year. They had done some field trials in Bangladesh, and hopefully within another 2 or 3 years, it will in fact start to become available. This is an example of science fiction. It's something called Golden Illusion. This is a little brochure that Greenpeace puts out. And it said, it's taken so long to develop this that it can't possibly work. Oh, thank you. And so, here's Greenpeace. They've been blocking this. They've done everything they can to block this, and then they claim, well, it took too long, and so therefore there must be something wrong with it. No, that's not good. I'll put it down. Since 2002, maybe 15 million children have died or suffered because of this. If this was going on in Rwanda, or it was going on in a country where there was a genocide being committed, everybody, the whole world would have been against it. So why aren't they against this? I want to know how many kids have to die before we think this is a crime against humanity. Let me tell you some of the good things that either are very close to fruition or are already with us. And the first thing I want to do is to talk about what I call the banana problem. Now, bananas are a staple food in much of sub-Saharan Africa, but especially in Uganda. And bananas have been suffering from a bacterial disease called Xanthomonas bacterium that kills the bananas. There is no natural way, no variety of banana that is naturally resistant to this. The only thing you can do is to put on pesticides that will go after the bacteria. It's expensive, doesn't work terribly well. You have to put a lot of applications in. And as a result, you go through Uganda and you find banana fields just devastated as a result of this. But it turns out that sweet peppers, another plant, is resistant to banana wilt. And there are two genes that are responsible, and you can take those two genes and put them into bananas using the GMO method, and now the bananas are resistant to banana wilt. These experiments have been done. They did not involve Monsanto. They were all done by local scientists actually in Kenya that did the original work. They're now growing in fields, in test fields in Uganda, and I'm really happy to report that just a couple of days ago, the bill that is needed to regulate
all of this went through the Ugandan parliament, and Uganda is going to be one of the first countries in sub-Saharan Africa to declare the GMO technique and crops made by the GMO technique okay. They finally have legislation in favor of this. So this is going to be a really good news story. And, when 30% of your calories come from this one crop that is being devastated, this is a big deal. This is really important. Another big problem in Africa is this fall armyworm. This is a little caterpillar that likes to eat maize. And when you really get inundated with this, it goes very quickly. It's throughout sub-Saharan Africa now. Zimbabwe has been particularly badly hit. 130,000 hectares of land on which they grow maize has been devastated by this disease. But there's a solution. The solution is something called BT maize. This was developed in the U.S., in the southern part of the U.S. a long time ago. Works really well. It grows well in Africa. It's growing now in South Africa where they have this problem. But Mr. Mugabe in Zimbabwe has decided in his wisdom, and thanks to the GMO, the anti-GMO activists, that there will be no GMOs in Zimbabwe. And so the farmers are not allowed to plant this resistant variety there. In Bangladesh, something called BT eggplant has recently been regulated and said to be okay, and this is now growing. I should say BT is a toxin. It's sort of a pesticide found in bacteria. It's actually perfectly harmless. This is the pesticide that the organic farmers use in order to kill off things. They've taken the gene and put it into a variety of plants, and in all of these cases, these plants do very well. They don't suffer from the devastation that comes otherwise. And the story that I like especially is Hawaiian papaya. About 20 years ago, there was a rather nasty infection called a ring spot virus that came and started destroying Hawaiian peppers. And one of the agricultural scientists at the University of Hawaii figured out he could do something about this and came up with a very clever GM technique to protect the papaya trees against this particular virus. As a result, today, something like 77% of all of the papayas coming out of Hawaii are GM papayas. And they're sold in the US and they go all over the place. Now what happened was that about 3 years ago, parliamentarians and the members of Congress in Hawaii decided that they were going to abide by this GMO labeling law. You probably heard about the moves that have been made to label everything that is made by GM techniques as a GMO organism. And the idea, of course, is that people won't buy them. So all of the other farmers see this as a way of stopping people buying them. When they tried to do this in Hawaii, the farmers were up in arms. They said, no one's going to buy our papayas anymore. And so they went and they protested, and they protested loudly enough that the government came up with a creative solution. They say, well, we will grandfather papayas. We'll only have you label things that were made by the GMO method from today onwards, but anything that was done before is okay. This is politics for you. It makes no sense whatsoever. And this is a wonderful solution, and there is a problem. So the GMO papaya saved the Hawaiian crop, but now Thailand has a problem. And so the Thais have a different solution to this. The Thais, they are a non-GMO country. They have regulations. They know GMOs in Thailand. And so what's happened here is that in a neighboring country, someone developed this same resistance to the ring spot virus. And so now there is a large amount of papaya, GM papaya, growing in Thailand, despite the fact that the government has prohibited it, because this is the only way the farmers can make a living. They know what they need to do in order to provide food that's good. And you've not heard of any problems with GM papayas in the US, because there haven't been any. So I'm getting to the point I want to start to wrap up. Okay? If you don't want to eat foods that have been derived by GM techniques, then don't.
It's your choice.
It's your choice. You have a choice. You can go to the supermarket and pick what you want to eat. But don't pretend that these foods are dangerous, because they're not. And if anything, they're probably safer than traditional foods. And for developed countries, food isn't a problem. Because of big agribusiness, they've done a wonderful job of making these very good crops. But when we start to say things and make statements in the developed world, let's remember that this can have an effect on the developing country too. We need to get more science in politics and ideally less politics in science. And politicians should listen to the scientists they fund. They fund us to do science, and then they don't listen to us afterwards. They really should. They should stop supporting this idea that GMO methods are inherently dangerous when the science says they're not. These things have been eaten now by cattle, by sheep, by pigs, by all sorts of livestock, as well as a lot of people, something like 25 years. There's not been one credible incident, not one accident that stands up to scientific scrutiny of this. But Greenpeace will tell you otherwise, because they take studies that were not done properly, were later retracted, and then they tell you and keep telling you and keep telling you that these things are bad. And I think this is something that maybe some of you can deal with. Paragraph 72 from the recent EU report urges the G8 member states not to support GMO crops in Africa. I find this immoral. I think to sit here in a developed country where you don't need these crops and to tell the developing world that they shouldn't have them, and to tell the people in the developed world not to support the Africans doing this, this is terrible. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to kill these people in the developed countries? And I think civil society needs to play a role too. Unfortunately, we have some leaders from the Catholic Church here who are very good. But groups like the Rotary clubs should speak out. Influential celebrities should speak out. And ideally, the media would focus on science facts and not science fiction. The media has played a large role in sending and promulgating Greenpeace's message, and they should stop. They should also listen to the scientists. And I was really pleased by this, which came out relatively recently. This came from the Vatican, and it said that they're talking about the Eucharist bread and how the Eucharist bread cannot be gluten-free, because apparently this is a big problem. But it says if the Eucharistic matter is made with genetically modified organisms, that's okay. Now, we need more of this. I'm very much hoping to be able to convince the Pope at some point to make a positive statement about GMOs, because this would have a huge impact. Very large number of Catholics around the world. Francis is an amazing Pope. He's probably the best Pope that I've ever heard about anyway. I was fortunate enough to meet him briefly last year. I think he could do wonders here. He has a chance to help solve the hunger problems in the world in a major way. And I just leave you with this thought: have a heart. The little boy on the left is in Europe. He's picking food from a very well-stocked bar, and on the right you have the children in the developing world. They don't have this choice. They have no choice. They just want food, and food crops made with the GMO methods can help to feed them. And you'll see at the bottom there's a website, supportprecisionagriculture.org. This is the website that I put together on behalf of the Nobel laureates, and we have a lot of interesting stuff on the site. We have a list of all of the Nobel laureates who've signed on so far, and now we just have some new ones coming along. I'm hoping some of those will join us. There is also the opportunity on that page to sign on yourself and say, I support this, and there's a lot of good material on that site. So supportprecisionagriculture.org. Please look at it, take a look through it, and I thank you all for your attention. Happy to take any questions that you might have.
Si quieren preguntar algo, por favor, haremos la traducción.
Well, I guess you can support it. This is terrific.
Este es el momento de dialogar con un Nobel.
Buenos días, señor Richard John Roberts. Es un placer que usted hoy nos acompañe. La deferencia que tiene. Buenos días. Buenos días, señor Richard John Roberts. Muchas gracias por estar hoy aquí con nosotros. Es un honor el que usted nos distinga con su presencia en este evento. Desde luego, no son muchas las universidades y los congresos que tienen la fortuna de poder contar con una persona de su valía y con el trabajo que a usted le avala, reconocido por ese premio Nobel, como se ha citado. Y puesto que usted reincide en esa deferencia hacia nosotros le reiteramos los agradecimientos. Quisiéramos, no obstante, ha comentado usted muchos aspectos muy interesantes. Ciertamente, un consumidor europeo, cualquiera de nosotros, siempre podremos elegir entre un alimento cultivado con agricultura tradicional, ecológica o transgénico. Ciertamente, el poder adquisitivo de un europeo, pues digamos que no es un benchmark, no es un referente a nivel mundial en términos de renta per cápita. Entonces, siempre podremos elegir. Pero está claro que muchas personas en países en desarrollo no pueden elegir. Y en ese sentido, los transgénicos puede ser una opción, como usted sugería, muy interesante. Pero yo quería preguntarle, a largo plazo, puesto que toda esta investigación es muy nueva, a largo plazo, ¿qué seguridades podemos tener de que, aunque hasta ahora, como usted ha insistido, no ha habido problemas, de que a futuro, a largo plazo, tampoco las personas de estos países, de estas circunstancias, vayan a tener estos problemas? Muchas gracias.
So I think you have to look at it sensibly. Okay? The sensible way to look at this is to say, is life free of risk? Every time you walk across the road, there's a chance you will be hit by a car. That doesn't stop you walking across the road. You go skiing. Skiing is quite a dangerous sport. Most people do it until they have an accident and then they stop. That was certainly what stopped me. Life is not risk-free. I cannot guarantee anything to be risk-free. And in particular, almost all the things really worth doing are quite risky. So we now have 25 years of growing GMOs under conditions where if there were going to be a problem, we might have expected one or two to come. If you look at crops from traditional sources, there have been plenty of accidents there. Celery. The ladies were getting cancer from cutting up celery. Is that a risk? Should we not have done that? And so I think you have to ask yourself, just what is it you're hoping? Okay? If you're hoping to get an absolute guarantee that these things are not going to cause any problems, I can't give it, no one can give it. And I think that's not what you want. What you want is to be assured that there's a very good likelihood that it is safe. And when you look at the way these things are made, you can test whether the gene went in, you can test what happens, you're able to test the final product and show that it's okay. That's not done for traditional crops. It's assumed that the traditional methods are safe. If anything, they are more dangerous than the GM methods. So at some point you have to think about the science and what is going on underneath it. Also think about the following. We have 126 Nobel laureates at the moment, all saying this is safe. How many are saying it's dangerous? How many do Greenpeace have on their side saying that these are dangerous? As far as I know, there's not one. I've not come across anyone. So, what do you need? What are you hoping for? An absolute guarantee? I can't even guarantee that you will walk out of this room and not have a heart attack because of what I'm saying. Life doesn't come with guarantees. Okay? Yeah.
Buenas. Soy voluntario de Manos Unidas y quería Quería saber cómo se pretende compaginar estos alimentos con los que ya hay y no perder la biodiversidad en estos países, que también es muy importante.
Well, I can tell you what usually happens with smallholder farmers is when a problem comes along, maybe an insect is coming along and eating their neighbor's crop, and their crop is going okay, the neighbor comes over and says, "Can I have some of your seeds?" This is the way in which you find out whether it's acceptable or whether it's not acceptable. And I think when you discover that your crops that are GM crops are better than the ones that you're already using, and they produce twice as much food, it's pretty obvious which one you're going to go for. And when you think about it, you're not destroying the old crop. You can save the seeds. There's a huge seed bank in Norway that saves seeds from crops around the world. You don't have to just sort of throw everything away and have it replaced by the new crop. And in fact, this idea has been shown to work very well in India. In India, they introduced BT cotton. This is a cotton that has the BT gene inserted into it. This has reduced the amount of pesticide that you need to keep the bugs away from the cotton 20-fold, and it's doubled the yield of cotton. And the farmers are delighted, and they can't get enough of it. The farmers want more and more. The farmers are very sensible people. They have to make a living, right? They want to do the best they can, and so they pick the best crops that they possibly can. In this case, the GMO crops are much better than the ones that are just there ordinarily. Okay?
Gracias por la oportunidad de preguntarle al doctor Roberts. Gracias. Yo vengo de Cruz Roja. Nosotros tenemos un programa de seguridad alimentaria aquí en la población más vulnerable. Pero mi pregunta va un poco al mismo compás que aquí el compañero de Manos Unidas. Ha hablado de riesgos, de evaluar riesgos de los transgénicos, y yo soy farmacéutica, yo lo comparo cuando un nuevo medicamento sale al mercado, que se hacen unos estudios de seguridad. ¿Cómo saben las grandes compañías que un transgénico no va a afectar al ecosistema que le rodea? ¿Hay estudios previos? Porque si no, parece que el conejillo de Indias, donde se hace el estudio es en los países en vías de desarrollo, cuando realmente los estudios deberían hacerse primero en nuestros países para asegurar que no hay modificaciones en el ecosistema a corto y largo plazo.
Okay. So do you do those same tests for traditional crops? So, when a new crop that's been bred by traditional means, when that's come along, do you worry about that then? Do you have to insist that these tests are all done then? In fact, no tests are done. They're just introduced and away they go. If it's GMO, then the tests have to be done ahead of time. In every country where they exist, there are regulations saying, yes, test them, see whether they're safe or not. And yet, this is something that inherently is probably safer than the traditional. Why don't we do that with the traditional crops? We've had lots of problems with monoculture in traditional crops. And the problem with traditional crops is it takes a long time to rebreed them. With GM crops, it's not such a problem. You can do it more quickly, but you can test them. And in fact, every country that has them has regulations saying, yes, these should be tested, show that they're safe. Now, when you think about the environment and environmental damage, I don't see any reason why you would think these crops would be inherently more dangerous than a traditional crop. If I've got 20,000 acres or 20,000 hectares of maize growing, don't you worry about the effect that is going to have on everything surrounding it? There's no reason to think that there is going to be any additional problem with GM crops that does not face traditionally bred crops. So there comes a point, we call it common sense. You just have to use common sense about this. Okay? There is no reason to think that they are inherently going to be more dangerous in any way. But it's very easy to get people scared. If you give me another half hour, I will tell you some stories about traditionally bred crops that you probably will never eat again.
La palabra la ha pedido. Preséntense un momento quiénes son cuando pregunten.
Buenos días, soy Tania Wagner, alumna de Premio de Medicina. Mi pregunta sería, como usted bien ha dicho, es un método muy rápido para poder mejorar todo el cultivo y todo eso. Y creo que el miedo realmente que se puede basar en ello es la rapidez y lo efectivo que es. Entonces, como todo en la sociedad, el problema siempre está en el dinero y la política. ¿Cómo podemos garantizar que estos GMO que se están haciendo no van a dejar a las tierras en las que se están usando sin nutrientes a los 5 años, o que vayan a hacer a los granjeros dependientes siempre de esas semillas, que por ejemplo que las purifiquen y que las hagan que un año produzcan muchísimo y luego deje la tierra infértil o algo así? ¿Qué propone usted para garantizar que no se haga todavía más dependiente a estos granjeros?
But basically, you do it exactly the same way that you do it with a traditional crop. So you use good agronomic practices. Okay? You circulate the crops over a field to make sure the soil doesn't get displaced. There is no difference. Once you've made the plant, the way you then take it out into the field and grow it is exactly the same as the way you would do with a traditional plant. So you take into account whatever effect it's likely to have on the soil, and crop rotation is something that's been done for many, many years. There is no difference between something that's made by the GM technique and the traditional technique, except, as I said before, I think the traditional way is more dangerous. I think the GMO way is a much safer way of doing things.
Sí, me gustaría, Richard, hacer una pregunta y casi última, si es posible, ya para después estar con usted hablando un poco en el café que vamos a tener. ¿Qué mensaje, porque las últimas preguntas son muy parecidas y él insiste, lógicamente, en su mensaje de que es mucho mejor y el por qué, y yo creo que insistir sobre lo mismo, él ya contestó. ¿Qué mensaje le gustaría usted dejar en Valencia para las universidades del mundo en este tema y para los gobiernos? ¿Qué mensaje mandaría después de haber escuchado claramente todo lo favorable que es esto y lo que supone para la humanidad? ¿Qué mensaje le gustaría que transmitiéramos nosotros y diéramos a los medios de comunicación, muy especialmente para las universidades y para los gobiernos, para los políticos?
So the message that I really like to leave everyone with is to say, do you really want to sit here in Europe and deny the developing world the opportunity to feed itself? Is that what you want? Is that what you're all about? I find that immoral, if that's what you're all about. I think we need to do everything we can to help the poor people in this world. And I think in Europe we actually have a rather special responsibility to Africa, where our colonial practices did an awful lot of harm for the Africans. I think here we have the opportunity finally to help them. Let's do it. Let's not just sit back and have Greenpeace count its coffers. You know, this anti-GMO thing has been the best thing that ever happened to Greenpeace. They have raised so much money as a result of this by scaring everybody. Do you know what their annual budget is in Europe? 500 million euros a year. What do they do? Do they count it at night? They sit here and they say, we're going to continue this movement. The science says everything is safe. When they first got started, they said,
let's test, let's find out whether GMOs are safe or not. Well, those tests have been done, and they're safe. Why don't they just admit that they were right to call for the test? Now they've seen the results. Let's just get off the bandwagon and get on with all the good stuff that they can be doing. Okay? That's my message.
Un fuerte aplauso al Premio Nobel, agradeciendo su presencia. Y ahora el canciller nos dirá el tiempo que tenemos. Muchas gracias, doctor, muchas gracias. Un aplauso grande desde Valencia.
Many thanks, Herr Professor. Muchas gracias a todos. Vamos ahora a tener un merecido descanso. Si me permiten una última palabra, tengo que dejarles porque tenemos una reunión, por eso el señor cardenal no ha podido venir. Yo quisiera anunciarles también que mañana a las 6 de la tarde el señor cardenal y el gran canciller de la universidad estará aquí con ustedes para darles la última conferencia, la clausura del simposio. De todas maneras, mi última palabra quisiera decir que efectivamente todo este tema pues ha sido interesantísimo, pero mientras que nosotros discutimos si han sido buenos o malos los alimentos transgénicos, hay mucha gente que está muriendo de hambre en estos momentos. Es decir, tenemos que tener conciencia de que efectivamente pues todo esto tenemos que discutirlo, pero no olvidemos que esto es una cuestión de carácter ético. Mientras no haya una conciencia aguda de que este problema tiene que resolverse ya, que es absurdo que mueran personas, no podemos mantener pues solamente unas polémicas de tipo científico. Ciertamente son muy necesarias, pero el problema no es solo problema químico, biológico, es un problema ético. Lo que hay que cambiar es la mentalidad de que no podemos permitir que estamos en el primer mundo, que sigan muriendo tantas personas de hambre. Mientras no cambiemos el corazón, alimentos transgénicos o no, seguirán habiendo estas tremendas injusticias. Muchísimas gracias y dentro de media hora nos vemos de nuevo.
Después a las 12:30 el Premio Mundial de Alimentación Mar Bon Montagut estará